Good morning from the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. It's Sports Talk again, our weekly program which discusses the various issues going on in sport. We take faculty members and staff members to discuss these issues. We've discussed an awful lot. And this morning we're going to discuss something that is dear to our hearts because we've seen the process and the end product of it all year long. To my right is our Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Steve Butler, and to my left is our Dean of Student Services, Dr. Tim Foley. Most of you may have witnessed from the outside and from the sidelines all the kinds of things that are taking place in the College of Sport today. Simply, the question is, what has big broadcast money done to sport at all levels? If we take a look, we see the multi-million-dollar contracts, multi-year contracts for professional athletes and even for college coaches. The segmentation of the NCAA into yet another classification, and maybe those so-called Big Five conferences are going to completely separate themselves and create their own type of governing body. The multi-billion-dollar TV contracts that go to specific major college conferences. And now the idea of giving some kind of money, remuneration or whatever, to Little League players. The time seems now where we need to ask the question, what has big money done to sports? And I'm certain that every one of us has an issue to deal with. By way of background, we got to this position not just because of professional athletes. Remember, in 1984, the NCAA was in a very, very serious lawsuit. The lawsuit was NCAA versus Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma, and it had to do with television broadcast rights. Well, the NCAA lost that, and it opened up the doors for individual institutions and individual conferences to negotiate their own contracts with major television networks. Ironically, Notre Dame is the only individual school to have an individual contract with a major network. They have a contract with NBC. All the other major colleges are doing it via their conferences. The SEC has just launched its own SEC network through the auspices of ESPN. All of that means added revenues to the conference. When it comes to professional sports, we've got new collective bargaining agreements that allow the players' unions to negotiate really, really good contracts, even though there's some caps, some salary caps associated with it. Universities and major sports, major conferences provide revenue sharing for conferences, and the money that they share is in the hundreds of millions of dollars for each institution. There are cases now pending before the courts in which the NCAA is being challenged as a cartel. Its concepts of amateurism and so forth are being challenged. One of the things, and this is the case that's coming up, which the student athlete merely wants the cost of attendance. And I know we've talked about that before. And it could be that the money for cost of attendance has been interpreted by the others who don't know what's going on as a pay-for-play, but it's not quite that. It's just giving them an interesting type of perspective. Only last week, Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports published this article calling for some kind of pay-for-play for the Little League players. And it's only for those teams that make it to the finals. And all of this, Steve and Tim, reminds me of, you may be too young to remember this, Melanie had a song in the 1970s, and it was, "Look what they've done to my song, Ma. You know, look what they've done to my song." This same kind of thing is happening to sport. And so, do you believe that increased revenues and the availability of increased revenues to sport and sport organization in America has fundamentally changed our notions of sport, how we play the game, and how our focus may or may not even be an achievement after all. It's a toss-up. First one out, fire away.
I don't think it's changed how we play the game. You know, in looking at this Little League World Series, you know, you hear on the radio the $80 million. I think you would hope that some of that money went to some of these programs, especially in urban or inner city areas where, you know, I think baseball is at its lowest with African American participation. I think it was at 6%, and the commissioners even talked about that. So I think we would hope that some of that money would go to some of these areas where we can increase the participation as needed. But has it changed the game? No, you still got to hit the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I think for our generation, you know, I don't watch baseball any differently now than I did when I was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I get to watch a lot more games because of the way things are. But it's still fundamentally baseball. Like Tim said, you got to pitch it, hit it, catch it, throw it. But you know, the idea of what money has done is, and television, and even you can watch games on the internet or your tablet now. I think it has brought this whole new generation of people to look at it differently. I think a generation 1 or 2 after us probably does look at it differently than we did when we were in our 20s because of the big money. You know, if you read Dan Wetzel's article, it's really hard to argue with any of his points.
I know.
It's a very well written article, and his contention is that you should get paid only for the games that are on television.
Right.
And you know, he makes the argument if a 12-year-old actor or actress certainly would not do a TV show without getting paid.
Makes sense.
And he was talking about he used the number $750 per episode, and then put it into a college fund or a trust fund so the kid could draw it out when they were 18 or 21 or used to pay for college. And like I said, when you read his article, it's hard to argue with any of his major points. They all make sense. They all seem to be, he makes the point, would anybody else in the world go on television for free? And I think those kids that are playing baseball today, they're playing baseball. You know, you watch the joy when they win, you watch the tears when they lose, and to them it's just a baseball game. The fact that they're on TV, I think, to be totally honest with you, from watching the games, has more of an impact on their parents than it does on the kids.
Oh yeah, that's the way it is with most youth sports. It's very, very interesting, and I also think that Wetzel makes the point. He uses the Disney, since Disney's the one that owns ESPN and so forth. Disney pays their youth actors. Molly Cyrus was coming up. She was one of the Mouseketeers or whatever. Well, let me ask you guys then, what does this do to our notions of amateurism? We're all familiar with pro and professional contracts and so forth, and you know, when all of the activity was taking place between Miami and Cleveland with respect to LeBron, and they talk about trades now, they're talking about how much room they have in their salary cap and so forth, and this gives a whole new dimension to us understanding the dynamics of the business of sport. But when it comes right down to it, when we take a look at the large majority of sports being played in our country today, it's youth sports, interscholastic, and intercollegiate. What's happened to our notion of amateurism?
I still consider them amateurs. I still think we can use some of that money to help benefit them. I know the article Dr. Butler just mentioned about putting a trust fund, doing something along those lines, but I still consider them amateurs, even if there is some money given to them for their performance on the camera.
Yeah, I agree. I think our notion of amateurism has long since become antiquated. I think the ideal of people playing for I think you can make an argument that maybe the last real amateur was Bobby Jones in golf. You know, that was in the 1930s. There's just so much hypocrisy when you consider one person to be an amateur and one person not to be an amateur. And we've talked about this before. I think that it really is about in my mind, signing the contract is what makes you a professional. You know, if this new Super 5 conference decides to give college players a stipend so they can buy their mom some flowers on her birthday. I don't think that makes them a professional. So the point guard for the national champions can buy a pizza, doesn't have to go to bed hungry.
Right.
But it's. I think that everything else has evolved, and I hear all the time, being a big baseball fan, there's a lot of baseball quote unquote traditionalists, and they say that we don't want to change the game.
Yeah.
And I say, well, if that's the case, put your computer down and type your article on your typewriter. And, if you don't want to evolve with the changing times.
That reminds me of those who have seen Moneyball. Mm-hmm. All Billy Bean did was take these concepts of economic analytics and apply them to baseball. And of course, he was, by all his scouting staff, they just cursed him all which ways. But it brought them into the 20th century, 21st century now. Everybody's doing it now. Everybody's paying attention to sport analytics.
And the owner of the Boston Red Sox made him a humongous offer to come there. And that whole concept of Moneyball is very effective. And it depends. It depends on your definition of success. I made this argument in one of my classes last semester. Was the general manager of the Houston Astros successful last year? They had the worst record in baseball, but they had the biggest profit in baseball.
Right.
So depending on what his marching orders were, what the mission statement of the ownership was, he either was a horrible failure because they lost more games than anybody, or a huge success because they made more money than anybody.
So that means you can make money off of a bad product. Huh?
Yeah,
I guess.
Absolutely.
I guess. I know that we've got an awful lot to cover in this topic, and once again, our time is a little bit short, but I think one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to refocus on this concept of amateurism. You mentioned it. We've talked about it in these programs before. For lack of a better phrase, Anglo-American notion of amateurism really comes out of the 19th century and early 20th century, and that was revealed by in a piece by David Pearson, I believe it is, when the elite, the socioeconomic elite in Britain, did not want to associate in sporting contests with the common laborer. And the common laborers happened to have some pretty good athletes playing, and they would get what was called broken time. In other words, they got off time, their company would pay them off time so that they could go and play in these contests. Well, this obviously outraged the upper class, the dukes and duchesses and so forth. And so they came out with this notion of amateurism. It's the only reason you play is for the love of the game. And that somehow or other spread, but, and this is time for another discussion. If we live in a society that says we want free market enterprise and it's capitalism, if your product is your ability to play, should we not receive appropriate remuneration for that on whatever scale? You could carry that to some terribly poor extremes, I believe, but essentially I think one of the things going to have happen is we're going to have a re-examination of this notion of amateurism. And what effect is all this going to have on youth sport?
Yeah.
Really?
When I look at those little league players, they're having fun, and one of the real positive things about youth sport is the safety issues they're looking at. They've had the pitch count with baseball, the tackling in youth sport in football, the heading of the soccer ball. But I don't think those elements have changed. So I don't see a lot of it's still going on.
In one of the games over the weekend, they showed a helmet, the batting helmet from the 1950s that the Little Leaguers wore. It was like the hard plastic wraparound thing.
Yeah.
There was nothing on the top; it just covered your ears. And one of the kids had just got hit in the head by a pitch, and with the helmet he had now, he was fine. He ran to first base. Mm-hmm. And Barry Larkin and Nomar Garcia-Parra were talking about if he would have been wearing this helmet, it may have been a different outcome. Yeah. But I think with Little League baseball and Pop Warner football and those things, I think that's where you can make the changes. The batting helmets. When I was playing American Legion baseball, in the 70s, I didn't have to wear a helmet once I got to first base. Now they have to wear double flap helmets the whole time. But people get used to it at that level. It's easier. You can't just come in tomorrow in the major leagues and change rules for safety. Like Tim and I have talked several times about how we need to get some kind of facial protection for pitchers, because a pitcher's going to get killed.
I think they need to wear a hockey goalie mask.
Something to that effect.
You know,
but you can't go to Clayton Kershaw at 27 years old and tell him he has to start wearing this now.
Right.
But if you start in the youth leagues and build it so they become used to it.
Well, you know, all of us have played sandlot ball, and I can never ever remember anybody playing sandlot ball football getting a concussion. As much as I disagree with 99% of what he says, Lou Holt says, I have a solution to this concussion thing. Don't let them wear helmets anymore. That'll solve it. And you know, when you take a look at rugby, they don't wear helmets. Do they have a concussion problem? No. And so it's like this. Every time we have some type of amendment to our physical condition, we can end up using that in some fashion, assuming that it is protection. But then it becomes a problem. Right. Seat belts give people a false sense of security. Well, I can go faster and I'll be safe in the seat belt. You know, I think that's kind of a nutty way to think, but that's what happens. So we give them helmets, and it becomes another weapon. Closing comments, Tim.
Again, you know, it's great to see. You know, these athletes are having fun. What a great to be on TV at that age. It's amazing. Whether I would hope. I would hope to see if you got big money involved. It gets down to the athletes, even if it's facilities. You know, looking at the cost of some of these bats and gloves nowadays, I think many families can't afford that. So I hope if money's involved, it gets down to that, so we can increase participation and just the joy of the competition.
Yeah, Tim took the altruistic route. I'll take the selfish route. I think that some skeptics and cynics will say that big money has ruined sports. What it's really done for me is given me the opportunity to watch lots more games. I mean, there's so many games. I don't have any of the special packages, and I get probably 30 football games on a given Saturday. Just in the free network.
Same way with baseball. What puzzles me though is baseball really has a long season. And when they're showing game highlights at night on ESPN, sure looks like either a lot of people left early or they didn't show up. So I don't know what's going on.
They came disguised as green
chairs. Yeah, they came disguised as green chairs. Hey, thank you for tuning in again. And on behalf of the United States Sports Academy and Sports Talk, we want to thank you for sending in your suggestions to www.sportstalk@ussa.edu. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again next week, same time.